Hello, my name is Daniel, and in this tutorial I want to show you how I work with my car control rig here inside Unreal Engine. And we want to create a nice animation here in our example level, a nice drift animation, and you will get this also if you consider to buy my car control rig on CG Trader. You will find a link in the video description. And then you will get this whole Unreal Engine project with the example level here. And we want to create a nice animation for it. So we have to put in our car. And let's open up the content drawer. And here we have the nice Porsche 911 Turbo car control rig, which we can simply drag and drop into our scene. And as you can see, now we are in the animation mode here. And inside the animation mode, we have two new panels here. We have the animation outliner. Here we will find all our controls of the control rig. And if you click one of these controls, you will see here in the animation details panel, we have the different attributes which we can animate. And I don't want to work with this layout, so I simply close my animation details and my animation outliner. And then I want to work in the animation mode without these two panels, because I can simply show the controls also here inside the viewport if I press G. And as you can see now, the controls for the car rig are visible, but we see the billboards for the decals in our scene, and we can simply hide them. So if we click the show menu button, we have the advanced settings here, and we don't want to have the billboard sprites. So I simply uncheck this, and now you can see only the controls are visible. Okay, first of all, I don't want to see the decals on my car control rig, so I simply choose my car control rig, and in the details panel I simply search for decal, and here we have the advanced render settings and the receives decals settings, and we uncheck them, and now we are ready to go. We don't have any decals on our car rig anymore. Wonderful. And the next thing I want to do is to clear the selection here. So I have everything visible, every track visible inside the sequencer for my animation. So let's clear it. And as you can see, we have only here the control rig component, or the control rig track inside the sequencer. And if we clear this, we also have the animation track and the transform track for our car. So first of all, I want to switch to 25 FPS, and then I want to save my sequence. And to animate this car, I need some nice track which the car should follow, and in this case I can create a cinematic camera rig rail, which is nothing else than a spline. So let's create it here inside our scene, and let's snap this one here to the surface of our street. So we enable snapping here, and then we move this right ball, and now it should snap to the street. Wonderful. And the next thing I want to do is I simply disable the top, because I want to create my spline path now. So let's hide also the car control rig and simply jump into the top view here. And we also make sure to jump into the unlit view, and now we are able to create a nice spline path for our car. So as you can see, if you zoom closer to this camera rig rail, you will find these points here, these white points, and you can adjust these white points. It's nothing else than an Bezier spline. So I can move this point, and I can also adjust the tensions here. And if I select the point and hold Alt on my keyboard, I can simply create a new point out of it by moving it. And let's create a nice path for our car. So let's jump into the objects transform, and let's create a nice path for our car. So let's adjust the points a little bit, and we make sure our spline path is nice and smooth, no wobbling inside this path. Wonderful. Let's create another point here and move it out. Whoops. Okay. I think that's nice. Move this one out a little bit. Maybe something like that. And we make it nice and smooth. Wonderful. And now we are able to attach our car to this spline path. So let's jump back into the perspective view here. And let's make our car visible. And I simply jump into the unlit mode because for animation it's better to work with the unlit mode because you can see everything. So let's get this camera rig rail into our sequencer by simply clicking on track and then actor to sequencer, and we search for camera rig rail here. So now we have this one in the sequencer, and we have to attach our car rig to the rail. So I simply create a new track for it, and it is an attach track to the camera rig rail 1 in this case. And now our car snaps here to the rail, and we have to adjust the car a little bit so we make sure it sits directly onto the spline, and we also make sure the front axis sits directly here on the starting point of the camera rig rail. So that's very important to have a nice driving behavior for the car. Make sure the axis sits directly on the starting point of the spline. And I simply move it a little bit down like that. That's fine. And now we can animate the attributes of this spline path here. So if I select the camera rig rail, we have this attribute here, which is called current position on rail. And if I crank it up or down, you will see the car follows the rail, but it doesn't change its orientation to the rail. And for that, we have to lock the orientation to the rail. So take a close look to the car. And if I check this one, you will see now the whole car follows the rail path. Wonderful. And now we can animate this current position on rail by simply creating a new track for our camera rig rail here. So let's click this button here, track, and we need the current position on rail. So now we have this one inside our sequencer, and we can animate this value here. So let's move the slider to the first frame and create a new keyframe here. And then I want to move the slider maybe to 120 in this case and change the value to 1. Okay. And we have another keyframe. And now we can play the animation here As you can see here, wonderful, the car follows the spline, which is very nice. And until the car starts to drive into the curve, I want to slow it a little bit down because it starts drifting and the car should slow down a little bit. So let's create a new keyframe here. Wonderful. And another keyframe maybe here for 65, frame 65. Another keyframe here. Okay, and now we can simply start the animation again. And if the animation doesn't loop in your case, simply hit this button here. It's the looping button. So now it stands on no looping and now it stands on looping. So let's play it again. And as you can see, the whole animation starts again and again and again. And now during our animation is playing, we can simply adjust the keyframes here, which is very nice. And to slow down the car a little bit, I simply have to move this third keyframe, maybe something like 75. And as you can see, the car starts to slow down a little bit. Let's adjust it in the curves editor here. So I simply click this button and now the curve editor appears and we don't see nothing here because we have to select the current position on rail, and now we see our keyframes here, and we can simply adjust the keyframes here, also the tangents, and I want to move it a little bit like that. So we have this slow down behavior and then it accelerates a little bit more, and I can simply adjust the keyframe here, maybe something like this. And I think that's fine for now. Maybe later we have to adjust it a little bit more. Okay, let's start with creating the drift behavior. And for that we have to animate our controls for the car. And here we have this back control, this blue control here. And we want to animate the y-axis. So let's open up the car control rig. And here we have the back control. And first of all, always I want to set a default keyframe value here. So let's create one here. And until we start driving into the curve, we should start with the drift. So let's create another keyframe here and maybe crank this value up to something like that. Wonderful. And then we simply drift along the path, and I simply want to copy this keyframe here to hold the drift, the whole drift. And as soon as we leave the curve, we have to start with the counter movement. So let's move the slider something like 75, and then we need a negative value, maybe minus 50. Something like that. And then we drive further along the spline, maybe something like 85. And then we should have the default value for our back control. Let's play the animation here and take a look. Wonderful. Okay. Now I have two keyframes here, so let's delete this one. Okay. And I don't want to have a keyframe for C and X in this case. Okay. Let's play it again. Okay. And let's choose the second keyframe and crank this value a little bit more up, maybe something like this. Okay, as you can see now, the car is way too slow. So let's adjust the keyframes for our rail a little bit. So I simply move it like that. Okay, and let's adjust the keyframes here for the back control. And as you can see, it's just a matter of spacing between the different keyframes and the correct values here. And I think we can adjust this one here further, something like that. And we can adjust this one here, maybe something like that. Let's play it again. Take a look. Okay. Maybe we change the spacing for this 3 keyframes here. Okay. So maybe something like that. Okay, and for this keyframe, we have to change the value again to something more extreme. Maybe something like that. Okay, and now it should look nice. Okay, and I think that's it for now. But later we can adjust the keyframes more and polish everything. But for now we have the main, the base construct of our animation. And let's start with the other controls. The chassis control and the steering control and the wheel rotation. Okay, first I want to start with the steering control. Let's take a look at the steering control, select it in the viewport, and as you can see we need the Z-axis for this one here. So let's open this one up and create a first keyframe for the Z-axis, a default keyframe, and then we start driving into the curve here. So let's create a negative value for this one here, maybe something like that. And then of course the whole curve we want to hold this value, so let's hold Alt on the keyboard and let's copy this out, maybe something like 62 is fine. And then we have to start with the counter movement, of course, and here we need a positive value, so let's move this one to something like 25 maybe. And then later I want to have a clean value, maybe here at frame 80 I want to have this 0 value again. And let's start the animation and take a closer look to it. Wonderful. Okay, and maybe we need to change this keyframe here and this one here. It's just a matter of spacing the keyframes correctly out. Wonderful. Okay, and now I have some keyframes here for X and Y, and I want to delete them, of course. Nice. And then we can also delete this keyframe here. And this one here. And let's play the animation again. I think that's fine. Maybe later we polish this thing further. But for now, I think that's the basis for the steering control. Let's adjust the chassis control here. So for the chassis control, I want to move every axis, or I want to deal with every axis. So let's create a master keyframe here for the chassis control, and that creates keyframes for all the different axes here at frame 0, and then here for frame 25 I want to adjust the chassis controls. So we have the x-axis and we want to adjust it maybe to something like that, and then we want to start with the chassis roll. So I have to adjust the y-axis in this case, and maybe something like that is fine. Okay, nice. And of course we want to hold this also the whole time, maybe to frame 62. So let's copy it, hold Alt and copy this out to frame 62. And there you can see we have a slight clipping inside the tire. So let's adjust this a little bit by moving the x-axis, something like that. Okay. And then we need to start, of course, with the counter movement here, maybe at frame 72. And the car starts to accelerate, so I have to create a negative value for the x-axis, and we have to roll it to the left side. Maybe something like that. And then later at frame 82 or something like 80, I want to zero everything out except the x-axis, of course. Maybe the x-axis has a value of -2. Wonderful. And here we have a value of -1.2. So maybe we can extend it a little bit further to -2.5. Or yes, maybe 3. Okay, 3 is also fine, I think. Let's play the whole animation again. Take a closer look. Wonderful. I think that's fine. Okay, that's too fast. So we have to extend it a little bit. So we hold it here, then we start with the counter movement, and then we zero everything out. We can delete these keyframes, move them a little bit to maybe something like 87, change the spacing here a little bit. Okay, I think that's the basis for the chassis control, and now all we have to do is to deal with the real rotation. So let's take a closer look to the tire rotation controller, and here we have to deal with this value. So let's create a start value here for frame 0 of 0, and then we drive into the curve here 25 maybe, and we change this to 10 maybe. Wonderful. And then we hold it, and then the car starts to accelerate, and let's hold it to 10, and then we accelerate, and I want to change it maybe at frame 80 to 15. Wonderful. Okay, let's play the whole animation again. I think that's nice. Let's take a closer look from top. Okay, and now we have all the keyframes here, and we can polish the animation. And how do I do that? I simply adjust the spacing of the different keyframes, and I simply adjust the curves of the different keyframes to get a nicer and polished look. And that's the main work of a car animation like that. So let's save the sequencer again, and I will polish the animation, and then I will be back and we take a look on how we can attach the lights to our car inside the sequencer here. Okay, here we are with our final animation, and I want to create some lights for the car. You could attach the light here inside the details panel. So if you add a spotlight here inside the car rig, we have a nice light. But the problem is we have an animation for our back control, this blue control here. And as you can see, if I play the animation, the light starts to slide or to move away from its origin position. And that's a problem. And that's the problem because we have an animation for our bone. So we have to attach the lights to the bone of the control rig, the chassis bone in this case, because the chassis bone is rotating with the back control. So let's do that. Simply delete the light here and create some new lights for the control rig. So let's create a new spotlight, and maybe we switch to the lids mode. And here we have the spotlight. We rename it to spotlight left, and we change the details a little bit here for the spotlight. Maybe intensity to 160, attenuation radius to 4000, inner cone angle to 20, and outer cone angle to 40. Wonderful. Let's copy this light and rename it to spotlight right. Okay, let's jump back to frame 0. And here we are. Let's switch to undid. And now we have to create a new track for our lights. So let's search for spotlight left, and let's search for spotlight right. Okay, nice. Let's save the sequence and create a new track, attach track for our Porsche Turbo control rig. And now we are able to select the chassis bone. So let's do that. And we do that also with the right light. We choose the chassis bone here. Wonderful. And now we can zero the lights coordinates out. So let's do that. Wonderful. And something like that. Wonderful. Let's move the right light to the right lamp. Something like that. Nice. Copy the coordinates and put them into the left light, paste it, and move it at the Y axis. Nice. Let's jump back into the lids mode, and now we have some nice lights. And if we play the animation, the lights follow the rotation of our bone. How cool is that? Wonderful. Nice. And now we have the final car animation. And one thing I have to mention, if you want to render this out, it could be that the lights do not follow the chassis bone rotation. And if this happens, you should convert the lights into spawnable lights. So we do that here. We convert them into spawnable lights, and then maybe you have to reposition them back to the light, to the lamp here of our rig. So let's reset everything back and reposition them. Okay, And let's move it here, the right light to the right lamp, something like that. And then we copy this one to the left light, paste it and move it here. Okay, wonderful. Let's jump back into the lids mode and play the animation again. Nice, it works. And now you are set up to render everything out and the lights should follow. You shouldn't have any problems with the lights. Wonderful. Thanks for watching this tutorial. See you soon and goodbye.